Okay, it's 2 o'clock here on the afternoon of the 16th of May, 2018. This is Toni Weisskopf, publisher of Baen books. I'm Rinehart. I'm the Slushmaster General, and we are here to conduct the second session of Live Slush. Our first session, I thought, went very, very well. This morning we looked at 7 volunteer manuscripts, and I want to just give kudos to the people who volunteered to let us look at their manuscripts live and let other people hear what we had to say. It takes a lot of courage not only to write a novel and submit it somewhere, but to allow someone to subject it to this kind of treatment. That's above and beyond. And what we found in this morning's session was that on the whole, those submissions were better than the ones we often see.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure why, unless it was just that the people had confidence in what they had produced.
But I think it's worth pointing out that the quality of the slush is better than it was 20, 30 years ago, back when I started in this business. That people have become more sophisticated and more professional about submissions, and they are targeting their submissions more intelligently. Gray's going to show you some of the.
We do still get paper slush, unsolicited manuscripts that come in the mail.
Which is fine.
We don't get very many. About 90% of our slush comes in electronically. And in this case, for today, we printed these out so that we could both have a copy in front of us.
Yeah. But it does mean that that the easiest cut of slush, which is that it's not science fiction or fantasy, and it's not written in a recognizable form of English, are not what we're dealing with for the most part today. I haven't seen the pile that we have next, so there may be a few of those, I don't know, but we didn't have any of those last session. And that does mean that we have to read further, and that's a good thing. We want that. We want the things that are interesting to us. So.
And as an author, if you're an author, that's your goal, is to make us interested enough in the story that you're telling that we want to read more. I don't know if we
let's dive in.
Did a lot of introductory stuff in the first one. You can go back and watch that rather than repeat that. We'll just start with entry number 1. This is one that all of these came in electronically, and in this case the author used the comment section of the portal to submit the cover letter portion, and that's perfectly fine. It means that the cover letter doesn't come out formatted quite like a letter, but it's okay. It has the information in it. This is a fairly long cover letter, so I'll only read the first couple of paragraphs and then talk through the rest. But the author writes, "Dear editors, Jennifer Jo Hall is Port Liberty's top advised columnist," which right away doesn't necessarily say Baen books, science fiction, and fantasy to me. But wait. Responsible, practical, and willing to solve everyone else's problems, she fantasizes, though, about the fun she could have if she dared to break the occasional rule.
Rule breakers. We like rule breakers.
You're starting to get our attention.
Yeah.
When gentleman thief Jack Ampere emails her to ask how to deal with the local superhero Magnitude, okay, well, at least we have the fantasy element.
Yeah.
We don't do a lot of superhero things, have a few. Jennifer knows she should just call the police. Instead, she writes him back. Jack only uses his electrical powers to zap burglar alarms, not innocent people, and Jennifer's already filled a flash drive with news photos of his sly smile. What harm can a few secret emails do? Well, in the next couple of paragraphs, the author tells us that she decides to commit a crime, and in doing so embroils herself in various things. We won't get into that because we really like to get into the story. She does say, the author does say, that it's a 95,000 word science fiction novel, and that's exactly what we need to know. It's a novel, it's science fiction, although often I consider superheroes to be more on the fantasy side.
Yeah.
I'm a little iffy on that. However, the author does go on to point out that they've won the Ann Lab Award for Best Short Story in Analog, and has had honorable mentions in other things, and fiction that has appeared in other places. And that automatically makes me think this person is going to be able to tell the story in a compelling way, even if it might not be a Baen story.
Yeah, the analog publication says to me, one, I do have a firm sense of genre, and if you're telling me it's science fiction, maybe it really is science fiction. It's perfectly possible to treat superheroes in a science fictional, rigorous sort of way. So maybe. So.
But the only way we know is to actually look at the story, and that's what we'll do right now. We'll read a little bit of it, and you think about what you're hearing, and we'll think about what we're seeing, and we'll figure out if it's something we want to read more of. Part 1, Electricity and Chemistry. Chapter 1. Being able to fly would come in handy right about now. Jennifer Johal tuned out the Port Liberty traffic 40 stories below and clipped her mountaineering rope to a convenient flagpole. When she'd tiptoed through Meridian Tower's side door, the September breeze barely ruffled her hair. But up here, the wind attacked as viciously as any supervillain, cutting through her bodysuit and chilling her to the bone. Notes for next time. Layers are good.
So that's a cute voice, you know. I like that. It tells us superhero right up front.
And not taking herself too seriously, which I like.
Yeah.
She ducked a wallop from the American flag, big as a bedsheet, that sent a thrum down her rope and into her fingers with every gust of wind.
And that's a nice image. That's good. Yeah.
At least she couldn't spot any planes above the familiar skyline. Magnitude wasn't out on one of his crime-fighting flyovers. Would the rope hold her weight if she fell? She gave it a cautious tug before snapping the other end onto her costume's built-in climbing harness. She wasn't nearly as ready to commit her first burglary as she'd thought, and she still had a ways to climb. Enough hesitation. What would Jack Ampere do? The super-powered thief had pulled off so many brilliant heists that it was a wonder there were any treasures left in Port Liberty to steal. Up here, though, Jack's electrical powers would be no more use than his sly smile. Jennifer didn't have any powers, just a grapple gun so new the price tag was still stuck to the barrel, a glittery costume, and a BA with honors in English.
Would you like fries with that? That's nice.
But supervillain careers had started with less. The grapple gun weighed as much as a bag of groceries. Jennifer could barely aim it one-handed, but she didn't dare loosen her grip on the rope. Squinting against the sunset glare, she lined up the sights with the 41st floor ledge and squeezed the trigger. The recoil sent her stumbling.
Yay, recoil.
She felt the rough edge of the ledge under her heel and the touch of nothingness beyond. Her body tingled with instinctive certainty. I'm falling. But, just like the clerk at Altered Egos had promised, the non-skid soles of Jennifer's boots didn't slip on the smooth stone. She didn't fall. The grapple clinked unseen onto the ledge above.
Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, it's good language. We've got a voice. We have a firm sense of the character, and the question that is set up in the reader's mind is, why is this person, who seems to be sympathetic and a reasonable person, trying to set herself up for a career as a supervillain, right?
That is a good question.
So we have a query, we have a voice, we have a sense, we see that the author has a reasonable grasp of English. Way to go, degree. And so the next step, as we have seen, is that Gray and I would, at this point, skip ahead to the synopsis. And see if the author... see if the story itself is one that we think would appeal to our audience.
Mm-hmm.
So...
now, this author has provided a 2-page synopsis, and because we have others to go through, we won't take the time to read the entire thing. I'm just looking here to see if we have any questions yet. We don't. We have some folks out there who have said hello, and so hello to John and Nolan and Rachel and Beth and Peter and Tom, and goodness gracious, that's great to see you guys out there. The synopsis begins, Jennifer Johal is practical, responsible, and always ready to help with everyone else's problems. The combination has made her a successful Port Liberty advice columnist, but she fantasizes about the fun she could have if only she broke the occasional rule. Then Jack Ampere, the
Right,
good-looking...
Yeah, this is all summary that we got from the.
That's a good point.
Yeah, from the cover letter.
Third paragraph begins to tell us more than we had in the cover letter. Then Jennifer spots a misplaced ID card and dreams up a scheme to live out her fantasies by stealing an $8 million chunk of amber.
Okay.
She buys a costume and a grappling gun, filches the gem, and meets Jack Ampere in her new villain's identity as Static. Jennifer loves her new secret life, from dates with Jack to befriending the villainous snake woman Ophidia. But now she has her own problems to solve. Magnitude, the local superhero, always shows up at exactly the wrong moment. Worse, the police investigations into Jennifer's heists keep crossing paths with her everyday life. And I'm sure that this will give us more detail about the story as we go
It does.
into it.
This seems to be a nice, interesting mix between paranormal romance and superhero, which I don't think we've seen very much of.
It's not ringing a bell from that perspective.
Yeah, and so it's got that that nice logical. If we have a world in which superheroes are real, how does that play out, right? So we have the store that caters to people who are looking to outfit themselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? We already saw that in the first couple pages. So all of that it looks good.
And we have the fact that she herself is not a superhero, but is sort of insinuating herself into this world. I would read more.
Yeah, and we see from the ending that she does metamorphose, and thank you. The outline does in fact include the ending, which I want to know, because if it didn't end in the way that I approved of, then that would be a a negative. So yeah, it looks like she has been transformed by the end. So yes, I would also read more and see if the writing develops with as much promise as it began. Now, one of the things we have seen from more sophisticated, more professional submissions is that you will get a very highly polished first couple pages, and then the writing tails off because those pages have been workshopped, they've been sent around to beta readers, and so you're not actually getting a good impression of the writer's full control.
But it's the beginning that has to at least capture our interest enough that we want to keep going.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a factor. So.
Now we have a question. What do you do if you get a great book, but it simply is not what Baen does?
Then we will do our best to make suggestions to the author to find a market for them. But I will have to say, if it's a great book, we will do everything we can to publish it ourselves. I mean, if we think it's great, then we're going to try to publish it. We don't have, we have an audience that is a very specific audience, but what they're looking for is good story, and what matters to them less is genre, whether that good story is urban fantasy or military science fiction or hard science fiction or epic fantasy, so long as it has the good story aspect to it. So I would say that's an extraordinarily rare case, that something is great but not right for us.
And from my perspective, as sort of the first line of defense, if you will, I let her make those decisions.
Yeah. That does
even
come
if
to
it's
me.
if it's close, if it's something that I think is a good story but not quite right for our catalog, I will tell her exactly why and let her make that call. And unfortunately, this is one of the areas in which some authors have become annoyed with us, because we have held on to their stories for a period of time. And it's because if there's a chance that we will say yes, we really don't want to say no until it becomes clear that we're not going to be able to fit it into our catalog somewhere.
Yeah.
So good question. Well, we have another. Maybe we'll get that before we do the
Okay.
next one. Aside from submissions that don't fit your requirements as far as genre or length, do you ever discard submissions based on the cover letter alone? And the answer is no. In the office here, we were talking earlier about how writing a bad cover letter is worse than providing no cover letter at all. But I will always set the cover letter aside in the same way that I set the synopsis aside and dig into the first part of the story. I would, unless there's something in it that this is clearly not for us. If it's a children's book, if it's a short story that they're submitting or something of that nature, then I'll write back and say, you're submitting this children's book and we don't do children's books. That's...
If there are threats in the cover letter, but we had that back in the day. You would have submissions by somebody who was, clearly insane, that there was a notebook with, words repeated over and over again. Yes, we did literally have that. But just a bad cover letter. No, I mean we've had manuscripts addressed to Jim Baen, and Jim passed away in 2006. So we'll still
saw one of those just last week.
There you go.
It does still happen.
He was good, but he's not that good, and he's certainly not reading Slush. So.
All right, so we'll move on to the second selection.
Yeah.
This one has a very brief cover letter. Again, just put in through the comment system. That says, "Sir, ma'am, I am a retired naval officer. I flew prowlers in combat. I flew Hornets at 200 feet, going 600 miles per hour. I was the air operations officer for 2 SEAL groups. This is my first novel. It's a story about redemption after having deemed oneself unredeemable. Military science fiction." Now, it doesn't tell me a lot about the novel itself. It doesn't tell me how long it is or anything about the storyline, but that's okay because, again, we don't require a cover letter. The cover letter is probably not helping or hurting in this case.
Well, I would say, all right, the guy is telling me he's military and it's military science fiction, so that's useful information to know. So we'll go from there.
Now, this one, the synopsis was in the front, so as I said, I put that aside. This particular submission is in a pretty good format. We talked a lot about formatting in the first go-round, so I won't belabor that. There's a big pull quote at the top that I will skip because I want to get right into the story. And it begins, "Presently, the mid-26th century. Chapter 1, Cannon Fodder." I'm not sure how to pronounce the name of this ship, but I'll give it a try. The Hyollin Goal was cannon fodder. Bent, broken, pushed far beyond the life expectancy of its keel, it was a death trap. Having been retread half a dozen times, it was now a garbage hauler with the ability to capture everything on the periodic table. Brett Ternan knew the history of the ship. He felt sorry for it, like one would an old bicycle that was beyond repair. You loved it for what it had once been, but you knew it was doomed for a recycling heap. Sequestered within the Hyollin Goal's overtasked fusion chamber, he was trying to keep the damned ship from killing them. "Brett, can you hear me?" Brett jumped. For the briefest of moments, he'd actually believed he was alone with his thoughts. He knew better. One was never alone on a prison tug. The tug would probably become their coffin, as 6 other crewmates would suffer his fate.
All right, now I've been told 3 different things about this ship. One, that it's a military ship. 2, that it's a garbage hauler.
It's a garbage hauler, but it's also a prison tug.
And 3, it's a prison tug. So I'm already confused, and you don't want me confused.
Confusion is not generally your friend. Clarity is your friend
Clarity
when it
is
comes
your friend, yeah.
to writing. Along with the fondness he'd developed for the ship over the past 2 years, he'd also come to hate it for everything it represented. Whether they died today or 3 months from now, their lives were not their own, never would be. He chuffed.
Oh, chuff? Oh, no chuffing. There's no chuffing. Who chuffs? It's not Barney. There's no chuffing.
Hear me? A new sensation started tickling his mind. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony started playing in his head. Odd. He'd already chosen the soundtrack for his death, and it wasn't Beethoven.
Well, that's cute. Yeah.
He sighed. Marshalling his thoughts as the master composer's greatest work started threading its way through the few remaining pleasure centers of his brain, Brett realized the triumphant peace would not solve any of his problems. Brett! Talking with Rodney Silvern, I wish he would get to the actual conversation and confrontation with the person who's trying to get his attention. I'm beginning to lose interest as we go back and forth. Talking with Rodney Silvern wouldn't solve them either. The ship's senior crew member did not currently warrant his attention. Kim, Rodney whined. Can you hears him? 2 compartments away, Kim Barnes shook his head. No, boss, I can't. I've tried every frequency. It's useless. We're either getting radiological interference or he's ignoring us. And now we've shifted from the scene where Brett is to another place with other people that is a little jarring.
Yeah.
I would probably go start looking at the synopsis now. Do you want to?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So basically we're seeing something that's a little bit rough, but still might be interesting. We're going to take a look at the story and see if the story itself is going to be compelling enough to. Oh,
and look at that. The synopsis is actually shorter than I thought, because what I did was I skipped the prologue, which is okay. I always skip the prologue because the prologue is not the story. By definition, the prologue is before the story and apart from the story, so I don't generally read that.
I read the prologue. I'm different. I'm different there.
You know, if it's a page or so, I might read it, but if it's much over a page, It is actually a page here, but I guess it is.
And I don't care. I don't care how long the prologue. People have a prejudice against prologues, but you know, for me, it's just where it works out fine. But at any rate, the synopsis is a little short. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's going to tell us the whole story, but it says the story starts with the introduction of a prisoner, Brett Turner, on a prison tug fighting for his life.
Okay.
It doesn't seem like a logical response. His life is not his own. He is miserable, and you learn that he has recently lost his wife and son. But over a fateful few hours, he decides he wants to live. He will learn later that his son is alive and being brutalized on a mining penal colony almost a light year away. Nathan Winters is a special operations soldier, similar in style and brutality to Russian Spetsnaz troops. I also borrowed similarities to current Navy SEALs and Army Rangers. Now, at this point, you've broken the fourth wall, as it were, because you're not telling me the story, you're telling me how you wrote the story. So that's a little different. The difference is he's not a volunteer, but rather a test subject, an experiment brought to fruition. He's become a surgical instrument designed to instill fear and uncertainty in the government's enemies. It works. Rancor troops are a myth that most are unwilling to believe, but unable to dismiss. Nathan loses his connectivity and becomes obsessed with a vision he's had. Brett Turnan's son, Ben, being tortured in prison. He'll travel across controlled space to liberate Ben. He discovers his own humanity while searching for Ben. Jody and Kim Barnes are aliens. They've become fascinated with humans because we are advanced enough to harness the power of a star, but still savage enough to torture each other for the perception of power. They will be the catalyst that allows Brett to find his son.
And this is probably...
And that's where it ends. That's the end of the synopsis.
Right. So we don't actually know what the story is or how it ends, but apparently it ends with Brett finding his son. So there's really not enough here in the synopsis for us to get a real feel for how things go. And that's probably where I would have put the line of doom then. Line of doom, which is where I would stop reading and say, nope, I don't think this is going to quite be right for us.
Which is not to say that it couldn't be worked on,
correct,
and fleshed out in such a way that it would convey what the story is going to be about.
Right.
But in its current form,
no. And I think the thing that got me was that Jody and Kim Barnes are aliens, and we got no sense of that when we were first introduced to Jody and Kim Barnes. In fact, I first took a look at that name, and I'm like, yay, a normal name.
And then
there was no sense in that name that this is an alien, and there's no sense in the introduction or the description that it's an alien. So I think that the author shows the proverbial premise, but this particular one is not going to be right for us. So.
Before we go to the next one, we have a question asking whether a synopsis is a big picture summary or a summary of each chapter and scene more akin to an outline. The terms seem to be used interchangeably.
And the answer is whatever suits you best. I personally like a more chapter-by-chapter outline type synopsis because I find it useful to compare what the author thinks they've done with what they actually have done. And that's one of the reasons why I'll read the text first before I look at the synopsis. A lot of times the author will think that they have achieved something, and they'll say that they have done this thing in the first chapters, but I did not see that they did that in these first chapters, so that it helps me gauge the rest of the outline. I can compare what I know of the manuscript with the synopsis or outline.
But that just kind of comes down to formatting, whether you format it as, running sets of paragraphs that tell the story, or whether you format it chapter by chapter. You're still telling the story from beginning to end. The word that I hate to find in a synopsis is somehow.
Oh, yes.
I don't want to see you write, somehow they get away from the monster. Somehow they escape from the prison ship.
Yeah.
I want to know what that is. One of my friends on a writing forum used the phrase, unpack the somehow. And I really think that's what you need to do in your synopsis. It doesn't, obviously you're not going to be able to tell every part of every thread of the story of a 100,000 word novel, but you can tell the primary story arc. You can carry that thread through and tell us the resolution of the story.
Yeah. And the other thing that I like to see in either the cover letter or the synopsis is what you think the theme is, what you were trying to do with this novel, not just a recitation of plot. Because a novel is more than just plot; it's also theme, and I want to know that you know this. That's important to me. All right.
Our third entry, the cover letter looks formatted like a professional letter. That's a good thing. Dear Baen Submissions. This is a 92,000-word adult sword and sorcery novel pitting a thief against the two greatest threats the kingdom of Gur has ever known: demons seeking to destroy magic the world over, and the arrogance of the kingdom's own royal line. The dynamic narrative follows Sire Mirk into the politics of Gur, where he, an ungracious errands boy, has to thwart an assassination and defeat the demon behind it. And then the author says it's a fresh, fun story that lacks many of the stereotypes of the genre. At this point now, I'm not as interested in your cover letter because you're giving me an assessment of the story, and I want to make my own assessment of the story. And do you have any other comments on the cover letter? That's all I have.
No, but it also says life experience that will that he uses in the course of the novel. So again, I find that useful to know, and I appreciate it. So we've got a nice synopsis here.
A page and a half synopsis.
Yep.
This one came with a title page.
Fine.
Which is okay.
I like that.
And again, well formatted. So, chapter 1.
Boom. No prologue. We're just getting into it.
Sire ran at a full sprint, knowing exactly where to place every footstep along the roof despite the gloom. He cleared the blacksmith's awning in 3 strides and launched himself from the edge. Overshooting the gap between buildings in his zeal, he smashed into the outside wall of Miller's shop. His knuckles scraped into the wrought stone surface, but he surprised himself by catching the top of the frame of the shuttered window instead of the sill as he usually did. He hung for only a moment, letting out an uneasy breath as he realized he had fallen almost 2 stories. He had
Oh.
almost fallen 2 stories.
Yeah, okay.
That's bad
Yeah,
reading
yeah.
on my part.
Okay. Yeah.
Worse, he had nearly been seen. "What's going on out there?" called a groggy voice. The merchant was in town, making use of his apartment over the general goods shop. Thankfully, the ancient man moved at roughly the speed of milk curdling,
That's
leaving
nice.
Sair more than enough time to push against the jam and scramble onto the roof. Ducking into a roll, Sair rode the natural slant of the thatching down, then off the roof. He landed in the freshly cut hay pile just outside the Kingman's Stockings Inn. Even Millard didn't have a window facing the stockings, and, should the old man decide to investigate, it would likely take him until morning to get down his stairs. When Sair shifted, something hard pressed into his shoulder, and he looked up to see the pitchfork jauntily sticking out of the hay pile, only a hand's breadth from where he had landed. And it's written breath, but it would really be breadth.
Yeah, there's some formatting.
A little bit of
ugliness there.
mechanics
Yeah.
not working here. Trust Glinter to leave that lying around, he thought. His uncle never considered how leaving objects out of place might hinder a harried escape from the local wardens. But then, no one else in town ever worried how anything might hinder a harried escape from the wardens. As Sair rose, he tucked his gains into his boot next to his short strap knife and took a moment to pluck the hay out of his hair.
Whoa. He's got something in his hand?
And yet he was hanging on to
No.
the window.
Yeah.
And we're in his point of view. He knows what his gains are. He knows what it was. Now,
So-
maybe it was in a pouch and it fell or something of that nature.
Yeah,
I could
right.
make allowances for it, but it needs to be in the story.
Right, yeah. Now the reader is having to do that, and that's, so again, all right.
So at this point, maybe we'll go take a look at the synopsis and see if that tells us what was
Yeah.
that he's stealing and making off with across town. And it, in fact, maybe it's the thing that's in the first sentence. When
Magic-
Sair Merk, a small-town thief, decides to keep one magic amulet for himself, he accidentally finds himself as the spokesperson for all the dragons, from fairy dragons to the greatest of the metallic dragons of Dragon Pass. Since Sair can understand their speech now, they ask him to be their voice among humanity, most notably to stop the construction of border towers encroaching on the pass. Thinking the quest a fine way to become rich and so impress his sweetheart Carrie, Sair agrees. He heads to the capital with 2 fairy dragons as escort to present the case to the king of Gur.
All right, so I'm not liking the naming conventions. Gur seems kind of, that doesn't sound good to my ear. I don't like Merk as a last name. Sair is kind of tricky to figure out.
And that's just my guess as to how
Right,
it should
yeah,
be pronounced.
Yeah, who knows? And you don't know. Carrie sounds like a real world name. Merc is a real world word. So I don't like mixing that unless it's there's a really good reason for that. Now that's just my particular pet peeve. Lord Fowl's Baen, right? I mean, that worked fine for a lot of people. So we'll see. I'm not really being entranced by this. I'm not. There's nothing really that's drawing me in. I'm not getting a unique voice. I'm not getting a unique sense of world building.
I might read a few more paragraphs
Yeah.
just to verify that what I'm thinking at that point is the case, and I probably do that more often than I should. I'll kind of make a note. I'm on page 2, and I think I should stop here, but I'll read to page 3 or page 4. Or I'll
Right.
read the first chapter and think I'm not so sure, so I'll read some into chapter 2.
Yeah.
And my point of view on that is I want to treat manuscripts that come into us the way I hope mine is being treated at
Yes.
whatever publisher I happen to send it to. So,
But as you become more and more experienced with this, and how long have you been doing this now, Gray?
11 years.
Wow. Okay. So you find that
Generally my instinct is correct,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like to give people as much of a chance as I can. We do have a question before we move on to the next one.
okay.
First a comment. In adventure writing, authors sometimes hold information back from the person who is going to run the adventure during the synopsis, which drives me crazy.
Yes.
And yes,
We
I
agree
would
with you.
concur
It
with
drives
that.
us crazy.
And
Yes.
then the same person, Sean, writes, how important is a very strong first sentence when you read a story?
I don't care about it. I mean, it doesn't have to be strong. It just has to be clear.
Yes, clarity
Yeah.
is above all.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be quotable.
Doesn't have to be poetic.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be a masterpiece of prose, but it has to tell me what's going on and invite me to examine a little bit more.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that your first few paragraphs have to do, and one of them is orient the reader to the narrative voice. In general, in these days in science fiction and fantasy, this usually means the main character. It doesn't have to be, but usually we have to get a sense of who they are. Science fiction and fantasy, you have the further duty that you have to let us know where, when, and what technology level we are at. And all of that has to be done very, very quickly. But it can be done very, very quickly. And is done quickly in manuscripts and in novelists who have a firm sense of the story that they're telling. Now, does that mean as you're sitting down to write, you are automatically going to have this occur in your first couple paragraphs? Maybe not, especially not if you're a seat of the pants writer and you're sort of following along. This may be something that you have to go back and fill in, but you should go back and fill it in. So.
I like to think of it as you have the who, what, where, when, why, and how questions that are the big questions of life and everything that happens.
Yeah.
The opening of the story should answer a few of those. If you spend too much time answering the who without telling me the what or the why or the when, then I'm not getting a full impression of what's going on. If you spend too much time telling me the where, and I see that a lot of people who are going into a lot of detail on, the beautiful vista through the valley and the city at the end of the river and all of those kinds of things, and I don't even know who it is that's looking at this and why they care.
Yeah.
Now you're not exactly giving me a complete picture. It's like you wanted to paint the landscape, but you only used one color. It's not going to turn out to be a painting that really conveys a lot to the person looking at it. So again, I agree, the first sentence, not that important unless you're writing flash fiction, in which case the first sentence better just grab somebody and run. And
you don't have a lot of space. And one of the things that I will tell my workshop people is that with a novel, you have a lot more time to establish all of this than you do a short story. And in a novel, I like to see the norm established before you change things up. I want to see the main character before they are stressed, or at least to get some sense of the character before you put them through the ringer.
For folks who are familiar with the term, the inciting incident, the main thing that's going to happen that's going to send the hero off to whatever adventure they're going to go on, in general, we like to watch the inciting incident happen rather than be told that it happened and we're reacting to it. But that is something that you have a little bit more time to develop in a novel than you do if you're writing short fiction.
Correct. Yeah. So, all right.
All right. So this is the fourth one.
Yeah.
Very short little cover piece. Just says I'm submitting my manuscript, and it's not agented, not with any other publishers, which is all fine. So no points for and no points against.
Yep.
It's
Neutral.
Then we have a one-page synopsis, which we will look at in just a moment. And the chapter is 1, and I'm going to guess that it's pronounced Lispan.
So, mystery word doesn't actually tell us anything.
The mad woman fled to Lispan City in the whirling spring rains. The mud that season was thick enough that wagons and mules foundered in it. The Isacriel guards in their black, blue, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your word if you wrote the story. The Isacriel guards in their black, blue, and silver livery huddled over their clay tankards of tea and took no notice while the madwoman slipped through the gates. Lispan straddled the ivory river, a white city on a pale brown ribbon. On the south bank was a park, and she made her way to it in rambling steps. The park was sparsely treed and wound with white pebbled paths. She made her home on a worn bench, choosing on that first rainy night to settle her back against the slats. She attracted the attention of few at first. Sometimes a seamstress or a guard on leave would toss the woman a bread crust, or she would stumble into the steps of the domed temples and the priestesses would feed her broth. She kept her head down and rounded her shoulders to hide her height. In the day she crouched on her bench, driving her nails into her arms, bleeding. Sometimes she held still and fluttered her hands before her pale eyes. Sometimes she watched the roads the way rabbits eye hunting hounds, always on the trembling brink of running. A merchant with drooping eyes walked by her bench once. His ships were in from Maditara, holds swollen with spice and timbers and herbs. The apothecary in the Korun district had paid him well, and his pockets clinked with coin. His cravat was starched and new, and his cuffs were trimmed in lace. He saw the madwoman on her bench, nibbling her yellowed nails and picking off fleas.
That's nasty.
He threw her a gold
evocative.
coin and
Yeah.
made a circle with his hands, the sign for health. The madwoman caught the coin in her fingers and twisted it, bit it, and spat at the merchant as he turned to leave. She cried, "Pity!" in a hoarse, broken voice. He startled and turned. "There's no need for pity," she cried again. "What should I care for your charity, you know-nothing bastard?" And she flung the gold coin at him. It struck his hand. He hurried away, clasping his greatcoat around himself, though it was neither cold nor raining. The madwoman turned into her bench and snarled until her tears were spent. I'm a little bit conflicted about this because
Okay.
on the one hand, I'm kind of interested in why this woman is kind of crazy. On the other hand, I wonder if I might not get into her head a little more to experience her level of crazy.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't mind. I don't mind staying out of that head. I do wonder if she's going to be the main character or not. She doesn't need to be the main character, and we don't know. Ooh, also, there's no page numbers.
That is true.
So, and it's taking its time, sort of establishing itself. But I'm fine with that. That sort of slow pace does not bother me at all. So, it's kind of dark. It's kind of humorless. That is a little more of a concern to me. So, yeah. I mean, I would take a look at the synopsis. And it looks like the mad woman is, in fact, going to be the person we spend time with, although that's kind of hard to...
It's hard to know because she's not called Mad Woman in the synopsis. There's a woman
Right.
who is called Anthora.
And in fact, the synopsis doesn't seem to have anything to do with the first chapter at all.
The synopsis begins, 3 princedoms once ruled Jaishi, ruled by long-lived mages. Now one remains. A husk of her former self, Anthora, calling herself Ant, flees her collapsed homeland and the cruel cult who had imprisoned her. Ant searches for her former lover, Razanil. When Razanil commits a murder in self-defense, he is taken before the High Lord of Justice for his trial.
Yeah, it's not murder if it's self-defense, by the way. Homicide, yes, but not murder. So that's the subtle point, but...
Well, it could be that he's accused of murder,
Yeah,
although
but it
she does
says
say commits a murder.
yeah,
That's
so,
a good point.
So that's a subtlety that
Yeah.
is not,
Yeah.
the appreciation of which is not, in this synopsis, so, yeah.
Ant, who feels she relies on Razanil and wishes to speak in his defense, reveals to everyone that she is in fact a princess, lost for 100 years, who will take up her titles and responsibilities. She begins to rely on the support of Raz's adopted sister, Nalina. Raz and Nalina do not trust each other, but Ant has no one else. I'm because I can't immediately say that the mad woman is
Ant, or,
it's hard to make a judgment.
yeah, we can't, and that's why I like the outline form of the synopsis, is that the author would have been forced to relate how.
Right. In chapter 1,
Yeah.
Ant arrives in the new city and
Right.
these things happen.
Or not Ant,
this,
we don't know, but.
This is the main event
Right.
that
Yeah.
the chapter turns on. So, but the writing itself, I thought was nicely evocative.
Yeah.
And was easy to read, and I like things that are easy to read that don't make me do too much heavy lifting.
Yeah. The other thing that this synopsis lacks is any sense of theme. It's a sequence of events. These people do these things, but I don't know why I should care about these people doing these things. So I probably would not read further.
Okay. All right, and this next one simply says, please find attached a 2-page synopsis and the complete manuscript of my science fiction novel.
Lovely.
And sure enough, that's what we have, although the pagination turned the 2 pages into 3, but that's not a big deal.
Yeah.
This one begins, Entry 1, 2122 UCT, 17 Undemsis, 0009 UCE. Translator's note. Message has been translated to English from Philulia, the predominant language spoken on planet Voliri.
Yeah, because that sequence of numbers and letters tells us absolutely nothing.
Apparently, it's a time and a date
In
and
some other language
a year,
that we don't know.
but I don't know what it is.
Right.
To my fellow Moors, humanity is a pestilence upon this galaxy. I hate them, the fat ones, the skinny ones, the tall ones, the short ones, the ones as hairy as us. And I'm sorry, but I'm hearing the Oscar Mayer song in my head as I read that. That's terrible because it just really colors my...
Right, so but that's not something you want to evoke, yeah.
Well,
So.
and that's a thing, you don't know how other people are going to read what you've written. I'll continue. And the apes that wax and pluck themselves like coddled dogs in a show. They disgust me, all of them, and every one that dies pleases me. And who better to die than Titus? Titus, the war hero, whose feet were kissed, whose hair was braided, whose face we all know. Titus, the conqueror, whose name is writ on the darkest part of our souls. Titus, the savior of humans. Titus, the desecrator of the Moors. Well, brethren, I send glad tidings. I have used Titus' hatred to goad him into making a fatal mistake. I have avenged us all, though everything comes at a price. This journal tells of my victory. So this is sort of a journal format.
It's not actually, but it's.
Oh, it's just the
this is
the epigraph and the beginning. So this is actually not even the start of the story. Just
well, it's
prelude.
It's the frame. I like frames. I got no.
This
no
journal
frames.
tells of my victory. Use it to force recompense for the atrocities created by the humans' deathless bombs, whose very moniker mocks our sorrow. We all lost someone beloved. Make them pay, all of them. Sioste Marquina, And it's
Blah, 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 blah,
stuff,
blah, blah.
yeah,
Right.
known to the humans as Aaron the Moor.
That's better. I have a problem with Maor because it looks to my eye like
Moor,
Moor, which
yes.
is a real world word.
Yes.
And you
I
may
had
have wanted to
visions
evoke
of
that. but-
Iago and
Exactly, Othello. I mean, that's the only way, we modern people think of
the
Moors
Moors.
is Othello.
Unless
so
unless you
yeah.
grew up in Spain and you're used to Moorish architecture and
Yeah,
that
so you may be trying to evoke that, but you've done more than evoke that. You've invoked that.
kind of thing.
So
But that was really not the actual story. The
Right.
story begins, this afternoon, Titus was alone in his tiny bunk, hunched over his too small desk, and I was watching him. Once a general, now an overpaid terraforming captain stationed in a remote galaxy, he was writing the required daily status report for the company he works for, the Andronicus Corporation. Yeah, I caught the galaxy reference as well.
Yeah, and the reason why we're going galaxy is because galaxies and solar systems are very different things, and they're different scales. So,
And it's one thing to be within our galaxy, but to be in a remote star system from our own, it's a completely different thing to say, well, here's our galaxy, and we've been stationed in a remote galaxy so much farther away that it's almost inconceivable.
you are implying a transport system that, but basically, what
Even in science fictional terms, it's hard to
yes, and so
reckon with.
So once you have said that, then you're going to have to prove to Gray and myself that you understand that as well.
You have to live up to it.
And my suspicion is that it won't, but we'll see.
Now, in the interest of time, I'd suggest that we skip back to the synopsis.
And again, so far, there's nothing in this. The writing is perfectly fine. It's,
Yeah, from a construction standpoint, there's
Yeah.
nothing in it that says, oh,
Yeah.
this is, it's going to
Yeah.
make me want to poke my eyes out with a sharp stick to
Right.
continue reading it.
So the question is, is the story something we'd be interested in? Okay.
Someone comments, Titus Andronicus, Moor, and Othello seems like a lot of Shakespeare in this.
And it does, and that's
and
not
that's the-
necessarily a
and-
bad thing at all.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
because a lot of very fine science fiction stories are retellings
Mm-hmm.
of other stories or of historical events in the science fictional setting.
Right,
So-
and we certainly don't mind literary illusion. That's
Mhm.
all. I mean, that's all good.
The synopsis begins, Aaron the Moor, an alien, is writing a journal. He has lured Titus to a remote solar system to exact justice for his role as general for the humans during
Ding,
an
ding,
attack
ding, ding,
on
ding, ding,
Aaron's
ding, ding.
home world of Voliri.
Right. So
And here it's a
solar
remote
system-
solar system as opposed
Yeah.
to a remote galaxy.
Yeah.
And I will also say that, to have someone who was a general be assigned as a captain is a very odd sort of thing. So there are some things in this that are
Not.
problematic.
Yeah. Okay.
For 10 years, Aaron has plotted revenge for the deathless bombs that rendered his people infertile and ended the war. Titus is now captain of a human terraforming team for the Andronicus Corporation, and Aaron is pretending to be an inept pilot, the only alien on a rival team for the Gothica Corporation. Later, he reveals that each of the team members played a role in the creation or deployment of the bomb. He plans to exploit his knowledge of their past rivalries to coax them into killing one another.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. I'd find that extraordinarily implausible.
Now, I would, if I'm not going to read it out here because we're, almost an hour into our time and we still have a couple more to look at. I would at least read the rest of the synopsis to make sure that I'm not missing something good.
Right.
And I might go back and read a few more paragraphs, but I will say that I'm leaning toward this story not being right for us.
Yeah. And the reason being that it doesn't. The believability that I need to be able to fall into the story isn't there. So, all right.
All right. next entry says, Dear Gray Rinehart, hey, this person has done some research and knows who
Yep.
might be reading their letter. That's a good thing.
Yep. And they spelled your name right.
They did.
Which is tricky.
I appreciate that. Please find enclosed for your consideration my manuscript, 111,000 words, to your illustrious company.
So now you're just
yeah,
sucking
you
up.
don't need to go that route.
Yeah.
It is an exclusive submission, first installment in a proposed series, high fantasy, and so you've told us what it is, what to expect when we open it, and that's exactly what a good cover letter should do.
Right.
So we have synopsis is a page, then we have introduction, and this is again something that I would skip to get to chapter 1. Would you like us to read the introduction since you would not skip it?
I wouldn't skip it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where
Well,
they
we'll
start.
begin with the introduction.
We will take them at their word. This is where you need to start.
Somewhere lost amid the murky greenish-blue waters of the Azoic Ocean, 3 months' sail or so beyond the Anthalasia Divide, the island of Mariapus does not exist.
Where are you?
I'm on page 4. It's long before that part.
Oh.
Or did you not get all of the printout?
Oh, yeah, no, I didn't get all the, well, no, maybe I did. Oh, yeah, I thought it was part of the synopsis. Okay.
Oh, no.
All right, here we go. Okay, introduction. Somewhere.
Okay. I'll start over. Somewhere lost amid the murky greenish-blue waters of the Azoic Ocean, 3 months' sail or so beyond the Anthalasia Divide, the island of Mariapus does not exist. That is, inexistent as far as any known maps of Erengaria illustrate. A mythology unto itself, Mariapus has instead found life in tales told to children of great and terrible monsters there that feast upon young boys and girls who do not obey their parents. Nearly every dingy tavern or brothel or decrepit alehouse alike has a haggard old sailor who could spin tales knowing of its location. After many drinks of rum or wine or ale or a symphony thereof, yammer tales of its redded shores and beaches stained by the blood of such savage Magatia split from battles fought amongst its inhuman hosts. There's a lot of terminology in here that I'm not sure about. They would tell of how great reefs and formations of rock had been conjured from the ocean floor, making navigation to its realm all but impossible. Then again, perhaps that is the way it was meant to be, the last remaining oasis of the old world, trapped in prophetic fate, waiting for the coming of man. That said, what if Mariapus did exist? Would it be the most isolated and inaccessible location of all the 13 realms that not even the most dauntless of captains would dare venture?
Well, it's only 3 months sail. It's not that.
Not that bad.
that-
Is that why the Anthalasia Divide is never crossed? For those who do, never return? These things are started as sentences, but they're ended with periods, so I'm not sure if they're supposed to be questions.
They
or
should
not.
be questions, and yeah.
A seemingly natural phenomenon formed where the Tethys Ocean and the Azoic Ocean intersect. And that doesn't seem to have a verb,
Right.
unless formed is supposed to be the verb. So the mechanics here is
Yeah, a little
not
clunky.
exactly doing, isn't that nice? Somebody says I have a nice reading voice.
You do.
I'm doing my best, thank you. Oddly, these two oceans do not mix, creating a wavering line of murky greenish-blue water on one side and a dark blue shade on the other. This was no accident of design, but of intention.
Or was it? Yeah.
Or-
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Um,
I'm getting snarky now.
Okay.
So.
Well, again, to me, introduction is secondary to story, and so
Well, for me, I'm saying I'm taking the author as on its face and saying the author says you need to know this stuff before you start.
that's fair.
The story, and it's kind of clunky. So the question is, is the author right or is the author wrong?
I
Yeah.
only a few ways to find that out.
Yeah.
The actual chapter 1, is called Signet and begins, "The old world was dead. 1,000 deluges of time could not compare to its aftermath.
What does that even mean?
I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, there's some
So that's
some storytelling that is needs to be worked on. According to the synopsis, it has been 20 years since the Naian Wars ended, and the ground still cry from the blood spilt. And there's this word again,
Megatia.
Megatia.
Which-
If that's a real word, that's cool. I'll look it up and learn a new word. I'm okay with that.
But I haven't heard of
probably
it
this is
either.
not the time to introduce it to me.
Right, because it doesn't tell us anything. So yeah.
And then enter adultish wander. I'm assuming that might be supposed to be wanderer.
Yep.
So I would say that this is an entry that probably needs to be worked on some more.
Yeah, I think so. And the synopsis too is
very short.
it's very short, but it's also textbook unpacked the somehow.
Yes.
Right. It doesn't actually go on to tell us what happens
This
after
is
the wanderer comes in.
almost more of like a back cover blurb
Yeah.
rather than
Yeah.
an actual synopsis.
Yeah. So we really
And I find that is something that confuses folks from time to time.
we really do want to know what the whole story is in the synopsis. Obviously it's not going to have all the bells and whistles. It's going to be stripped down, but we do need to get a sense of that.
Mhm.
Okay, we have adultish wanderer. That's potentially interesting. What happens? Yeah. So.
All right, well, we've actually used up our hour, but we have 2 more to go. And so if you want to stick with us, we'll
We'll power through.
continue on. This next cover letter tells us that this story is written in the spirit of Golden Age science fiction, action and adventure that retains a depth of character and story in its 149,000 words. And again, that's your opinion. Let me form my opinion of your story.
Right. In the spirit of Golden Age science fiction is lovely, but then don't revere your own book.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's a few paragraphs of description, which is probably more important than the assessment.
Yep.
And this person has some editorial experience and has been involved in a particular creative writing group for a while. So I would hope that that what they're giving us is going to be above average.
And they give us a warning that they use puns, so that's good to know.
That's good to know.
So.
2-page synopsis that we'll set aside. And we have a prologue. I hate prologues, but we've already gone over that. So, but I'll read it. It's not too long. Or at least we'll start on it.
Yeah.
It was too dark in the laboratory, the prince decided, to appreciate the hateful stares. The hidden facility, one of several he maintained planet-side, was spacious enough.
All right, and that's already interesting, right? We have a prince and we have a planet, so, why do we still have princes when we're talking, space? So, there's already an interesting question in my mind. Why is that?
Okay.
So.
Long rows of biotubes stood against 2 walls, some occupied by 2 still forms, while others held creatures
should be others, but typo, yeah.
that watched him with baleful eyes as he moved with sinuous grace down the rows. Now, in this case, you may be working a little too hard for me.
Too many adjectives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tall for a Harak, the prince exulted in the hatred that the trapped creatures directed at him. His powerful form was deceptively lithe, the end product of millennia of refinement by the best Harak changers. His crimson skin was flawless, with his head scales patterned in a most becoming way across his bare head. They trailed down the back and sides of his tapering skull, past 2 pairs of ears to disappear beneath the high collar of his luxurious coat. Metallic design spiraled across its surface that gleamed in the murky light of the lab, an elegant contrast to the dull biosuits of the other Harak. My only comment there is that right in the beginning, it's dark, and the prince decided that he was going to appreciate the fact that other people were staring at him hatefully, and then we're suddenly out, that's in his point of view.
Right.
He's making that decision. Now we're out of his point of view and into an omniscient sort of description of him. I could wait for that description to come later and be peppered in somewhere else and stick with whatever's going on.
Yeah, yeah. But well, I mean, the assumption is when you say prince, right, that it's going to be a human, and so you have to get in the fact that he ain't human.
That is true.
Right up front, but you've already established it's too dark to see him, so you don't get to see him. So, yeah. So.
My Irtal, as you can see, we have been quite busy here this season, came a voice from behind him. A look of distaste passed across the prince's face, and he stopped, turning to regard the changer who stood nervously several paces away. The Harak was only half the height of the prince.
But we still have no idea how tall that is. I mean, is a Harak, the size of a mouse or the size of, a
that
lion?
he's tall for one, and
we know that, but we don't actually. There's no scale given yet.
right.
So yeah.
And had an unsightly cranial bulge, common for variants of his station. Dressed in a standard biosuit and carrying a data pad, the changer's ears flicked uncomfortably under the harsh stare of the powerful Harak warrior. Gesturing dismissively at the row of biotubes, the prince resumed walking leisurely towards the laboratory's central consoles. I can see nothing here that I have not seen before, despite the lack of lighting, he said in a bored voice. I have placed you and others in these facilities to continue the work begun during our invasion, yet your progress is minimal. He smiled as the changer raised the lights using his datapad. Better, he thought, as he admired his own long-fingered hand, its sinews rippling under his skin. So he's a bit of a...
little narcissist there.
Yeah. Aren't I special?
Yes.
The task I entrusted you with was to produce weapons, living weapons that I can use to my own ends as I see fit, without being subject to the will of another. The prince's face flushed, unnoticed by the changer, as the variant sputtered in shock. We're veering kind of close to the "as you know, Bob" sort of dialogue. That if you're not familiar with that, is sort of a trope and something to minimize, if not to avoid, that of explaining things in dialogue that characters just know.
Right. I mean, we have the sort of stereotypical villain kind of speech here, so I'm not happy about that. But
should we move on to the actual chapter and see if it starts on page 6.
Okay. All right. So that was prologue. That may not be the character that we're spending a lot of time with. It may not be the main character. In fact, it probably is the villain.
Setting something up for the main character to...
Right, which is, again, absolutely fine by me. I'm good with that.
Mm-hmm.
So
chapter 1 is entitled Tracks. Across the expanse of plain between the barren hills, the small caravan of Carracks kicked up a trailing cloud of dust. The thin layer settled onto the heads and shoulders of figures walking beside each of the small four-wheeled wooden wagons.
Okay, so you've used a made-up word and then you define your made-up word. That's fine. So
the Hyello drawing the Carracks had the worst of it. Each pair of the huge creatures had a handler beside them to keep the beasts' eyes and noses clear as best they could. Dust from the Kamut storms was thick this season and made travel miserable some days. The long hair of the beasts trapped cool layers of air next to their skin, but too much dust meant they overheated and tired too quickly. Hence the handlers' watchful eyes during the dustier parts of the journey as the six-legged beasts plodded along. As the evening arrived, the nomad caravan continued its long trek, travelers loosening their dust cowls as the air cooled by degrees. The caravan had left camp in the late afternoon, anticipating an easier journey in the cooler nighttime temperatures, which a lot of desert people move about more at night than they do during the heat of the day.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering what their lighting source is. So.
In the distance, sunset lit the edges of the foothills, revealing shapes climbing in jagged order along their slopes. A sharp eye could discern the outlines to be structures of some sort, though the failing light hid any details. Few of the nomads looked up, though, their
So the
eyes
structures
hidden
are climbing?
behind
That's, okay.
behind close-fitting goggles within the folds of their dust cowls. This is a case where I think having a clear point of view would help me to know, if I am one of the nomads or if I am one of the handlers of one of these creatures,
Right.
and I'm actually doing the task, I'm leading the caravan. It's what I'm seeing, where am I going? What am I wanting to do when I get there? What's in the caravan? Is it gold? Is it gems? Is it foodstuffs?
Refugees? We don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah.
Not all of this has to come in right away, but I want to be,
Oriented.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Let's take a look at the synopsis.
We had a synopsis on this one, right?
Yeah. Yep.
It has been 30 seasons since the Harak invasion of the planet Erda left the ancient and proud Dwim people decimated. The Harak, ruling over the Dwim from generation ships orbiting the planet, experiment on the Dwim people and drain Erda's resources to complete a mysterious orbital construct, the Transcelerator. A power struggle is about to erupt among the Harak. When the Transcelerator is complete, their immortal queen will take the Harak far across this current universe and out of the reach of their incessant enemy, the Chorith.
Right. Universes are even bigger
Bigger
scale
than galaxies.
than galaxies. So,
That's a tough one.
yeah.
However, the Prince of the Harak feels their people have already lingered on the Dwim's world for too long and is ready to revolt against her. Meanwhile, the Queen believes the unique genetic code of the Dwim is the key to the survival of the Harak, whose genetic structure has been damaged by generations of fleeing the Chorith through dimensional fractures.
Okay, well, that explains how we get from universe to universe, so, all right.
Okay. The Queen has searched for nearly 20 years for the last Hellion, the result of an experiment to produce a viable blending between the Dwim and the Harak. The successful interspecies combination of the Hellions could save the Harak from their decline and looming extinction, but this half-breed species threatens the authority of the Prince, who is the pinnacle of Harak evolution.
No, is it really evolution if we're controlling it at this point? So,
Ooh, that's a fair question.
yeah. And it's a question that doesn't seem to be
Let's see, we
recognized.
have fleeing a search force, we have some people are captured, then there's the civil war between the factions.
So basically, what we have is really a sort of fantasy type story, but a science fictional kind of setting. Yeah. And I don't think the blend is blending, sort of like those two oceans.
Well, and it's using some of the, science fictional ideas of genetic manipulation
Right.
and space travel and things like that. The struggle for power within the dynasty it's kind of a space opera-ish.
Mm-hmm. And there was nothing in the synopsis or what I've read that makes me want to root for one faction or another. We certainly from the prologue we didn't really care for the arrogant Crimson fella, and so you're not giving me anybody to root for. You're not giving me a side to go, I want them to succeed. You've kind of given me somebody to root against, but that's not really enough. So I too think that this would be something that we would pass on. So.
All right, and that brings us to the last one that we have for the day. And since we've been at this for an hour and 15 minutes, the I'm kind of getting a little loopy.
Yeah, so I mean, at this point, we probably would step away, take a break.
Oh my goodness, I would have done that. Can nobody do this for so long?
But the cover letter for this is actually kind of cool, and here is a case of a short, choppy elevator pitch kind of approach to a cover letter that works.
And it's China buys Washington State from the U.S. for debt relief. The werewolves who live in Washington State object. Chaos ensues.
I like that.
It's short and sweet. Doesn't tell us the length of the novel, but the cover page says it's 127,000 words, so it's in the right ballpark.
Right.
It does add that there's a lot of deep research in economics and military topics in this novel. And that's important because we want to have things that come across as realistic and plausible.
And well researched.
So now this author actually it has a table of contents in theirs, and that's okay.
Yep.
There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing right with that.
It says title a novel. We know it's a novel.
You
don't need the novel.
I could have blacked that part out but I didn't.
That kind of subtitle is, it's not an economic treatise. It's not, it's not a guidebook.
It's not a dissertation.
It's not a dissertation, so we already know it's a novel. But all right, so Chapter 1.
Chapter 1, Washington State, interesting times.
All right, but see the formatting here. We don't know is interesting times the title, or is Washington State the title of this chapter?
I believe interesting times is the
Right.
title of the chapter, according to this.
And so
I'm not sure what Washington State is supposed to.
I think it's supposed to be a subhead.
As
But-
in, this is identifying the location,
Right, but if so,
in which
it's
case it should come after the name of the title.
correct, and it shouldn't be in all caps.
Right. All right.
John Wolfe.
John Wolfe, a welder fabricator, 32, black hair and blue eyes, sat under a 30-foot-high wheeled sheet metal shelter in the yard. It was lunchtime at Nucor Steel. All of the fabricators wore leathers, suede overcoats that protect from most of the heat, sparks, and embers. The protective clothing showed years of abuse, rips, and burns. The laborers sat nearby. A light rain in the late Seattle autumn sky cut out a decent view of the Cascades. The smell of ozone still hung faintly in the air, and the sounds of industry were on hold.
All right, so check. We know who the character's voice, eyes that we're looking at are. We know what he looks like. We know more or less what the tech level is. We have, we're seeing what he sees. We have the scent, and
There's a lot of good sensory information.
and a lot of good orientation going on, right? So,
continuing. John, I don't want to sound like a dick, but give up on Lucy, man. It's been 3 months. Move on, Peter said. He was a hunter and usually shared some venison or game with the other guys. Tons of women would love to date a skinny-ass guy like you. You're tall, dark, and handsome. Get back in the saddle, buddy.
all right, now this is dialogue that actually sounds like dialogue, right?
Yeah, people talk this way.
People do talk this way, so yeah.
People talk more colorfully than this, but this is
They're-
probably a good way to start in
Right,
the opening of a...
They're welders, right?
Yes.
Okay. So,
Peter's right, except for that bit about not sounding like a dick, Jack said.
right.
I like back and forth repartee.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. John's a decent guy and I'm trying to help, Peter said, and flipped Jack the finger.
This is like the second one we've got this
I
time.
know. This
All
is...
right. You guys are pretty easy with those middle finger,
Yeah,
man. All
watch
right.
out there. We know that, Peter. Relax. John's not moving forward until he's ready. I heard that on Dr. Phil. Martin was British, didn't speak much, and had a dry sense of humor. Now, in this case, I would like to know Martin was British before he spoke, so that I could possibly try to hear a little bit of a British accent in that dialogue instead of trying to go back and put it in. He was mostly bald and took pride in his thick mustache, which helped to hide a deeply split lip. Marty liked his conspiracy theories and was full of doom and gloom about the future. Guys, I'm sitting right here. Should I leave so that you can talk about me? John said. Nah, we know that Lucy hosed you, buddy. Took the kids and stuff. We just want you to get back on your feet. Start dating again. Peter's sister should be out of jail soon, Jack said, and Peter threw a slice of tomato at him. Anyone care what I want? Just my kids back, for starters, John said.
Oh, we are not using...
Yeah, the what she's marking here, there's some punctuation issues that are cropped up. Those kinds of things can be fixed. John, I go hunting a lot, Peter started. Poaching, more like, Jack interrupted. There are other ways that you can do an interruption with an M dash that make it clearer.
Yep.
But this is not a grammar lesson. Peter flung another tomato. I'm running out of tomatoes here. Anyhow, John, why don't you grab your camping gear and come on out with me? It's not hunting season, but what I do in the off season is find sites where there are several herds of deer. Once season opens, I clean up. I sold my truck, John said. All I got left is the bike. It's a dual sport, right? It's got big saddlebags. Load up your camping gear for a night, and I'll bring extra stuff in the truck, Peter said. Let me think about it, John said. Peter didn't relent. That's an interesting construction. Didn't relent. Possibly there's a positive way of saying that. Mm-hmm. He cornered John near the tool crib and persisted until John caved. After work in the employees' parking lot with a map spread out on the hood of Peter's Ford dually,
all right,
he showed John where to go.
Yeah. So we have the introduction, banter ensues, stuff starts to happen. At this point...
We would go to the synopsis, except there's not one.
Oh, I see.
This one didn't appear to come with a synopsis, or if it came with one, I was not able to find it in the file to print it out.
Okay.
The good thing is that the language, even with some of the punctuation and grammar mechanics issues, is enjoyable enough that I would continue to read more of this.
Yep. It's clear from the spelling that it's either a Brit or a Canadian, probably Canadian, would be my guess. When we chances are very good that unless the British or Canadian spelling was important, we would Americanize it if we did publish it. It's not necessarily a bad thing one way or the other to start out with. So yeah, I would set that aside for looking to see more if... It says chaos ensues, right?
I would like to see the chaos ensue at some...
I would like to see if the chaos is resolved, right?
That's where the synopsis would really...
Right. If the whole thing is China buys Washington State, that's not enough of a story there. If interesting things happen with John, our viewpoint character, then...
Well, he's going to go camping. There are going to be werewolves. Something will go from there. That's my guess.
Werewolves of Washington.
Werewolves of Washington.
Right. So
I honestly, one of the things that caught my eye was Nucor, because when I was at the Industrial Extension Service, one of the guys on our advisory board was from Nucor Steel. So these kinds of things just pop up and catch my attention. We did have one question that we'll try to address before we call it a day. They say random process question.
Yep.
How much slower are you moving per submission now versus when non-live? And honestly, it's kind of faster now than non-live, and I'll tell you why. Because I don't have the time pressure to, I have 7 or 8 of these that I want to get done in an hour and a half time period. So a lot of times I will read more. Like I said, at the sort of in the tail end of the first session, I'll get to a point on page 2, page 3, maybe page 1, maybe page 5, where I'm going, I'm not really sure. I'm thinking that this is a no, but I will often read further into the piece just to be sure, just to make sure that I am making the right call for us. And that's what it boils down to.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we try to make clear when we write back to people is we are making the call based on our publishing company, and that call is not indicative of what call you might get from other people.
Yep.
Because you might fill a niche that another house needs to fill that we don't have a spot right now.
Yeah. Yep.
So there's a lot of things that go into it.
Yeah, I mean, when it gets to the level of sophistication that 90% of these manuscripts that we looked at today have, it really is a question of, is it right for our audience? As opposed to, is this a good book?
Right.
So,
yeah. We got several folks saying thank you, and
You're welcome.
we'll also say thank you to you just
Yes.
for staying with us, and I hope that it has been as instructive and informative as you guys say it has, and that as it lives on the internet for a little while, I hope that folks will get something out of it. I don't have anything else. Do you have any
just to
closing remarks?
Thank you guys again for sharing your manuscripts with us, and for allowing other people to benefit from this process and from hearing your work analyzed. We really appreciate it. It's very generous of you, and we thank you. So.
We did have one more question pop up. If we are graduates of pro-level workshops, do you want that in the cover letter? And it's a credential.
Yeah.
If you've graduated from Clarion, if you've gone to Orson Scott Card's Literary Boot Camp,
Superstars.
any of those kinds of things, absolutely. Because most of those are not necessarily by invitation, but you have to apply to it and be selected for it. And especially if it's one, for instance, if you went on the Superstars cruise that Toni was on, that would be something to include.
Right. It's another indicator that you're serious about writing as a profession. So it certainly doesn't hurt. Yeah.
So thank you again. I will remind everybody that if you do want to submit to Baen Books, we have these friendly, useful things called manuscript guidelines that are out on the Baen Books website and the frequently asked questions page. And you are highly encouraged to read the guidelines and follow the guidelines and submit your completed novel with synopsis whenever you feel like it is ready. So thank you very much. If you like what you saw, please give us a thumbs up down at the bottom. And if we decide to do this again, we'll let you know.